Welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. I'm Brea Baker here with my beautiful co-host, Jamira Burley. And today we're digging into that post-election angst and how those across the Democratic Party are navigating the need for both unity and accountability.
That's right. We're talking about the vote blue, no matter who camp and how it keeps us from building political imagination. Coalition work is important, but what happens when the opposition is so bad that it keeps us from envisioning and demanding more from those who are supposed to represent us? We're going to break it down. We're going to think about what's to come and from how we can be on the defense, not just be on the defensive, but also on the offense.
Yes, because we desperately need to get off the bench, out of the defensive era, and stop being so reactive. Whew. But let's start with some late headlines, okay? A new moderate way forward for the Democratic Party. This is a headline from New York Mag. And when you dig beneath the headline, it's a conversation with a new group called Third Way. And Third Way's proposal is a ban on far left candidate questionnaires, a shift from the dominance of small dollar donors. Wow, we went from being so proud that the average person would give their last $25 to the Democratic Party because they believed in it so much to saying they're too dominant and their preferences may not align with the broader electorate. And so now they're arguing for an embracing of patriotism and traditional American imagery, getting out of elite circles and into real communities like tailgates, gun shows, and churches. I mean, you cannot make this up. Their whole plan is to just do what Republicans are doing. And they really are running with this in mainstream spaces.
And that has not worked out for the Democrats for the last two presidential elections, right? Not referring to Joe Biden, but if we look at what happened in 2016, right? If we looked at what happened in 2024, that did not work. And so it's mind-boggling that these folks can look each other dead in the face and pretend like the data is not what it's saying. The data says that Kamala actually should have doubled down on her base. She should have actually been more transparent about where she stood on issues and how they differed from Joe Biden. And it's really frustrating that these folks who are probably very white representing, right, individuals who probably come from wealthy either jobs or backgrounds, telling us that the small donors don't really matter, when that's the thing that made Barack Obama win in 2008. Like that's our first Black president is small donors, people giving the last of what they could to ensure that we had a president that represented the interests of all Americans and not just those who are in the C-suite.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to see the sort of tactics that kept our finger on the pulse being deemed too far left and allowing them to control the party when it's like, so who are we representing exactly? And it's just an example of Democratic leadership failing to deliver on these major promises, because the real distinction between 2016, 2020, and 2024 is that Joe Biden wasn't coming off of a Democratic Party leadership. Right. So I think people also have to be really mindful of that, is that it's easy to win Joe Biden when you are coming off of the fear of the 2016 presidency of Donald Trump. But what Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris were up against was, hey, people have been experiencing Democratic leadership for the past 4+ years, and they want to know where it's going. Is it actually translating into something real for them? And unfortunately, we were too afraid to be honest with people about inflation. We were too afraid to be honest with people about what wasn't working and how we were going to pivot. So we doubled down on, oh yeah, they did nothing wrong. And that didn't get us anywhere, because people want honesty, people want transparency, and people want to know that you have a plan to do something different than what they're experiencing right now. And if we're too afraid to do that, we're going nowhere.
Yeah, people deserve nuance, right? Like, my job is not to rag on the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat, right? Maybe I shouldn't say that on a news channel, but like, it's true, right? My job is not to rag on Democrats, but my job as a U.S. citizen is to ensure that we are holding everyone equally accountable for the things they do not do in representation of our citizenship. And it's really frustrating when people are like unwilling to have these nuanced conversations around what the numbers said versus how people felt, right? And how people felt was that they were not getting what they needed in order to achieve the quote unquote American dream that we've all been sold a lie to. So I'm sure we'll definitely come back to that, but let's be real. If we're going to ensure that we have a more representative Congress, right? Elected officials who care about individual voters and care about what's happening at the kitchen table, but also what's happening in the boardroom, we need folks to realize that going further towards the Republican Party is not going to save the Democratic Party. If anything, it's going to alienate their base. And we know what the base of the Democratic Party is: Black women. Okay, let's be honest, it's Black women. We've shown up, we've shown out, we're organizing for you. And if they go that way, I can only imagine what's going to happen to the Black women who have tied themselves to the Democratic Party for so long. With that being said, there's another headline that I really want to talk about. Just when you thought that immigration was such a huge issue for the Trump administration, right? We talked about this in our last episode. What's the constitutional crisis that is happening around immigration? Trump is looking to monetize immigration, right? They are looking to sell $5 million gold cards to wealthy foreigners. Right, I know cars. I'm sure you all know why I'm saying cars, but cards to wealthy foreigners as for citizenship. Like, that is crazy to me that we are trying to monetize citizenship and create additional barriers to those who want access to the American dream and only feel like those who are welcome in America are those who have an abundance of wealth, because we know who will be excluded if this is the only serious way to get access to American citizenship.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And I think it also just reiterates that the goal is not to keep out criminals and those who mean harm to this country, because often those who have $5 million to spend on a gold immigration card are doing nefarious shit. Let's just be real, right? So we're not here for asylum. We're not here for refugees. We're not here for people who just want to live safe and dignified lives and want to do that in a space that is not where they were born. We're weeding that out and saying, as long as you can pay, we're going to turn the other eye. We ain't looking. We just do what you got to do. And we're minding our business. And that's really alarming and scary for sure. We all need to be very scared about the trajectory that this is going in, because it's already been a very inequitable immigration system, and it's only getting more inequitable. Some good news. Jamal Bowman just launched his new Built to Win Super PAC, which I'm actually super hyped about. Jamal Bowman, if y'all don't remember, he and Cori Bush were Congress, House of Representatives who were pushed out of their seats by AIPAC-backed Democrats, which also goes why we are not big vote blue no matter who folks, because you've got Democrats who are really Republicans in Democrats' clothing, who are pushing out real Democrats, real progressives who have their and their constituents in mind. And Jamal Bowman was his loss was such a huge loss for all of Congress, for all of the Democratic Party, certainly for my home state of New York. But I'm so glad to see him kind of turning that pain into fuel for more progressive leadership, and Built to Win is going to be making that happen. So I'm really excited to see what comes of this and to know that he's not stopping, he's not backing down, and he actually now is going to be working from a little bit of the outside to get more folks like him elected.
No, it's super exciting because you're right. We need more folks to do the work and to stand up and to organize themselves. And what Jamal is doing, I think, is a prime example that you don't have to be in elected office in order to create change, or at the very least organize to create change. So I'm excited to see what is going to come of that PAC. In another headline, to your point around, Republicans in Democrat clothing, we had 10 Democrats who voted to censor Representative Al Green, are clearly misreading the moment. And why they did so, as you all know, a few days ago, President Trump addressed the nation during his State of the Union address, which apparently he doesn't want to call it that. State of the Union address, and Representative Al Green decided to be outspoken during that address, which calls Republicans to create a bill to hold him accountable or to censor him as a participant in the House of Representatives. And unfortunately, 10 representatives on the part of the Democratic Party joined the Republicans in that vote. And it's a prime example that really frustrates me about this idea that decorum, respectability, is going to be the thing that saves us. And I remember, and I am reminded of MLK Jr.'s words in this moment of the idea that the white moderates are our true barrier to progress, are our true barrier to change. And if we don't start holding those folks accountable for censoring their own colleagues for standing up and doing the thing that they refuse to do, we're going to have serious problems in the next 2 years.
Preach that thing. Exactly. I think that if of what was said that night, what those 10 Democrats are more concerned about is Al Green's resistance to it, We have bigger fish to fry. And honestly, every Democrat should have walked out when he was forced out. Every Democrat should have said, I'm not listening to this BS and what the Trump administration is spewing. Because, I mean, what is the opposition for? What is the resistance for if we're going to only do it when it feels kind and nice and orderly? Like, no, we're here to filibuster. We're here to resist. We're here to stand up and say, not on our watch. I mean, what is the point? There is no checks and balances if they are not willing to stand up and say anything real. And I'm just really grateful. And this is not the only time that Rep. Al Green has done this. He's done it in favor of LGBTQ rights. He's done this in favor of civil rights for Black folks. And I'm just so glad to see someone so consistent. And there were a few people who stood with him, who also left. But it was not enough. And the fact that these 10 include women and Latinos and people of color is really concerning. It's not like all 10 are white men who are just aligning themselves with the Republican Party. Like, what is the Democratic Party committed to? Because right now it's not feeling very consistent at all.
Yeah. And, folks will say that, Republicans are playing chess and Dems are playing checkers. No, the Republicans are burning the board. There are no rules. And I think the moment the Democrats start to realize that they are playing a losing game against someone who does not care about the rules, do not care about decorum, do not care about respectability politics, do not care about the vast majority of Americans unless you're a part of the top 1%, then maybe they'll start waking up, unless they themselves don't see themselves as a representative or as a part of the 99% of us who are going to be suffering under this administration. And it's truly frustrating because Dems will forever be the party that says, I have friends across the aisle. Friends across the aisle wouldn't let go individuals who tried to unalive you on January 6th.
Yep.
Right? Friends across the aisle wouldn't allow people to make threats and to make gender only bathrooms these things just wouldn't happen by people who are truly your friends. And I think I'm waiting for the day for Dems to realize that, these are not your friends, right? These are your bullies who mean to cause you harm.
Yep. 1,000,000%, girl. 1,000,000%. You preaching, and they need to be hearing you. That's when they go low, we go high. But Michelle Obama, I'm sure, is taking them words back too. When they go low, we go to hell with them. I mean, at this point,
the 7 layers of hell. We're there.
Literally, I'm going lower and lower and lower because at this point, that's what we need. I think Dems are afraid to show that they know urgency, and that's a losing strategy. Yeah. You can't have people who are on their last dollar, who are in insane amounts of crippling debt, who are fearful of being kidnapped in the middle of the night by ICE agents, and think that decorum and having friends across. I don't want to see you having dinner with the opposition. I don't want that at all. I want you spending every waking moment.
Gavin Newsom.
Okay, come on now, because Gavin Newsom is out here on podcast interviews and buddying up with, and it's like, choose a side. I don't need you straddling. I don't need you showing me how good you can be on both. No, be a really great Democrat. That's what I need you to do. And I know you said earlier, it's not your job to rag on Democrats, so I can take that job for you, Jamira. I firmly do believe that as a registered Democrat, it is my job to hold Democrats accountable. I mean, yes, I'm going to speak out against Republicans for sure, but I'm not in their party. I don't expect them to speak for me. I do expect Democrats to do what they say they're going to do to earn my vote and to stop acting like they get to change every 4 years who they are. I'm sick of that. And so it is my job, if you're not going to do it on your own, to hold you accountable. And if you need a little verbal bullying to do so, I am happy to do so, because ultimately they're making so much money in lobbying. They're making so much money in trading. They're making so much money every time they go out to speak. And I'm just sick of politics being just a career move for people. And I need people to step up and say, no, this moment really requires a moral stand. There is a line not in the sand, in the cement that could not be crossed. Okay. And I need them to stop freaking crossing it.
Yeah, it's so funny. I tell people all the time who commit overly to their job that you're not saving lives. But actually, for the Dems, you are potentially saving or not saving lives. So do your job. And with that being said, we're going to take a quick break. You are watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
we begin tonight with the people who are really running the country right now.
Now, Trump is often wrong and misleading about a lot of things, but especially about history.
Donald Trump falling in line with President Elon Musk.
In the wake of the unsettling news that MSNBC has canceled Joy Ann Reid's primetime show, The Readout, Roland Martin and the Black Star Network would like to extend an invitation to all of the fans of Joy Ann Reid's MSNBC show to join us every night to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming on the Black Star Network for news, discussion of the issues that matter to you, and the latest updates on the twice impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump and his unprecedented assault on democracy, as well as co-president Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government. The Black Star Network stands with Joy Ann Reid and all folks who understand the power of Black voices in media. We must come together and never forget that information is power. Be sure to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/Roland S. Martin or download the Black Star Network app.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Before the break, we talked about the latest headlines surrounding the Democratic Party and its post-election strategy. Now let's get into the real conversation, the failures of the vote blue no matter who, and what it means for moving forward.
Yeah. Here's the thing, y'all. Every election cycle, especially over the last 10 years, we've been hearing the same message. This is the most important election of our lifetime. I'm sick of that. We're also hearing we can't afford to lose, vote blue no matter who. But what happens after we do that? Specifically as two Black women having this conversation, two Black women who are part of a demographic that consistently votes blue no matter who, we are not getting any return on that investment. What happens when the party that we keep backing in the name of harm reduction is not actually reducing any harm?
Yeah, and I think that's what's frustrating for a lot of people. I remember after the 2016 election where, I was going around talking to many people in the community who felt like nothing in their lives had tangibly changed over the last few years. And I think that's what many Americans feel like even right now, which is why a lot of people didn't show up to the polls, right? We had a lot of people who voted and Donald Trump did win. But there was millions of people who did not show up either, right? And it's because a lot of them feel disappointed by the party. And it's a prime example that if we don't start reimagining what the world could look like and how our representatives should be and could be, we're going to continue to see individuals who are who are saddling the line between not wanting to upset the Republicans, but also not fully showing up for the party that elected them.
And that's mind-blowing to me because Republicans do not care about upsetting us. So why are we so concerned about making them feel super happy? And I just feel like we're just playing the wrong game, right? Like it's very confusing and exhausting to see Democrats come up with, well, we just don't have the votes to really push on this, issue right now. We just don't have the power. Like Republicans will use whatever slim margin of a win they have to push everything through whenever they get the chance, using all the executive orders at their behest, using every single Republican vote to block Democrats or to push legislation through. And it's like, at what point are we going to push a strategy through? It's especially frustrating when you realize that this strategy of vote blue no matter who is really built on fear. It's like you make Democrats so worried that what happens if Trump wins, so worried about losing their basic rights, so worried about this political catastrophe that we don't have the time to look up and say, wait a second, if all I'm ever doing is keeping Republicans at bay, are we ever building our own strategy forward? And you said this earlier, Jamira, you were talking about how we need to get off of the defense and back to offense. We've been on defense for a really long time, so long that we wouldn't even know what to do if we really won. If we had 3 branches of government tomorrow, what strategy and agenda are Democrats pushing through other than being the anti-Trump? Like at some point we have to have our own vision that we're excited about, because fear does not build power. It keeps us playing defense instead of getting into a space and demanding better.
And realistically, we should have had a plan for reimagining, or a plan for, dealing with each of the realities, right? The slow response that we're seeing so much of the party to the policies and practices that are coming down from the administration is a response to the fact that they didn't think they were going to lose, right? They didn't think that they were going to lose, and they didn't think it would be this bad. Yet they told us that this would be the most important election of our time, that he was problematic to the safety and to the future of the American democracy. And so as someone who is a millennial, and the first time I got to vote for president, it was for a Black man and a white woman. President Joe Biden, not President Joe Biden, he's not Black, President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who both ran for president, the first time that I, as a Black woman, was able to vote for president. And to your point, every election feels like an what is that word? Feels like an extreme crisis that we're constantly having to tackle. And at no point do any of us truly get to live, because we're constantly told we're moving from one crisis to the next crisis and the next crisis. And it's a lack of vision coming from our party that needs to move beyond just getting people into office, but also having a plan for what could the world look like if all of us was free? What could the world look like if women didn't constantly have to barter for the rights to their own body? What would happen if immigrants didn't have to worry about ICE knocking on their door or showing up to their school, their children's schoolroom?
Yeah.
None of that ever, I feel like, is truly discussed in a way that makes any of us feel whole or any of us feel hopeful.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. There's no dreaming happening right now. And so when the left does dream, it's like moderates within the Democratic Party are like, oh, that's illegitimate. That's pie in the sky. And it's like, I for one, would love to see a little pie in the sky, something. Give me something that I'm like, that's just crazy enough for me to want to see what even shoot for the stars and shoot for the moon. And even if you don't make it, at least you're among the stars. Like, let's say you tell me you're going to get complete student debt cancellation, universal health care, and you're going to legalize marijuana. Okay, I want to see what getting 1 out of the 3 looks like. Like, I'll take part of the way there. But right now, it just feels like the ones holding all of the power in the Democratic Party are just afraid to admit that they don't know what they're doing, and they would rather follow the playbook that they've been playing, even though it has not won in over a decade. Let's be real, because President Barack Obama won on a very different strategy, and a lot of the kingmakers in the Democratic Party did not think he was going to win, and were not backing him until they felt like, oh my God, this tidal wave of energy is too big to ignore. Mm-hmm. We've been avoiding atypical strategies, but atypical strategies have what's been winning the Republican Party their gains. No one saw Donald Trump coming in a legitimate way, and yet here he is on his second term. We have to stop acting so shocked when populism wins. And so we have to start following the lead of young people and Black voters and working class communities, and before they get fully disengaged.
Yeah, and that's it. There's both populism, but also there's hate, right? At the underbelly of America, there is hate. Yeah. The vast majority of people who are frustrated with the Trump administration right now, who voted for him, are people who did not think that it would impact them. They were perfectly okay with other people experiencing harm, perfectly okay with other people losing their rights. But the moment that it impacted them, then all of a sudden they have a discrepancy that they want to pose to this administration. And I think until Democrats be honest with themselves, even Vice President Kamala Harris at one point during the administration said that America, it was something to the extent of America is not racist. And I was like, America is not racist is the reason why you lost, in part. Is the belief that you as a Black woman did not have the chops to be president. The belief that you as a woman did not have the chops to be president. And I think admitting the reality of this country doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to see it be better, that you don't want to see it thrive, that you don't have aspirations for it to be better. But it is a reckoning of the true history of this country that allows us to not have to repeat it again.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. She also got on The View and was asked, what would you do differently that Joe Biden didn't do? And she said that everything he'd done perfectly. Yeah, I'm like, I don't really know what we're like, then why are we even here? If people are so content and so happy, we have to be willing to speak the truth. And I think we're so focused on having the perfect talking points and saying everything the exact right way, and never throwing a Democrat under the bus. It's not throwing a Democrat under the bus to say, listen, Joe Biden inherited in America after 4 years of Trump. He had a lot of work to undo, and there were some things he could have done better. And as his VP, I was excited to stand by his side, but of course I have my own ideas. I mean, when they were both running for president against one another, she was very fine, critiquing things that Joe Biden had strategized and had done before in his administration. And it was just like she was afraid to do that, lest it be seen as throwing him under the bus. And I just think we need to have more conversation about how critique and rigorous critique is not throwing each other under the bus. It is so important to a democracy. It's how we avoid dictatorships, right? Mm-hmm. It's how we avoid allowing untested ideas to continue to harm. It's like, hey, we tested it for 4 years under Biden, and maybe he didn't know what going into it. He tried his best. We realized it didn't work. Americans are struggling financially, and I have a plan to get us out of that. And the unwillingness to say that was a problem. And even after the election, there are people in the 92%, and I voted for Kamala Harris. And there were people in the 92% of Black women who voted for Kamala Harris who will not admit that there were some missteps in her campaign. They say she ran a perfect campaign, and she did nothing wrong. And I just don't.
Perfect campaign doesn't lose.
Perfect campaigns don't lose.
All right.
I mean, we are dealing with misogyny. Yes, we are dealing with a racist America, but let's be real. Perfect campaigns would have gotten us a lot further. It wasn't close. And there are, definitely opinions on why it wasn't. And I firmly believe that there's some stuff that is not being said or some things that need to be looked into. I wish that there had been more of a fight for a recount, but ultimately it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
The results.
Yeah. And instead of us putting our energy on blaming Palestinians and blaming Arab Americans or blaming immigrants for not voting for her, had she received all of those votes, she still would have not won.
Yeah. And that's scary.
The focus should have been doubling down, getting people who were not politically inclined, who were not voting. It required us being honest about the state of America while also, planning for the future and celebrating what we've accomplished. But the lack of nuance is not going to help us win. It's not going to create a space for imagination. And to be honest, I'm in a space where if we're not imagining a new future, we are perfectly okay with the state of the world that it currently is. And to be honest, that state of the world is scary as hell.
Right. As about to say, we need to all be concerned about the current state of the world. Yeah. And as you said, it kills political imagination when we cannot concede that there are things we could have done better. There are ways that we could have expressed more urgency. And I think that's the problem with this two-party system. It's like our only choices are bad and a little bit less bad. And we're expected to be grateful for those crumbs while people keep the status quo intact. And it's like, people are tired of that. And so people are not showing up, or people are showing up and saying, I'm willing to vote for the really I mean, there's no excuse, in my opinion, for voting for Trump. But apathy does come from a real place. I think people who are just saying, like, I'm jaded, I don't think that showing up is going to do anything. That means that this political system, for however long they've been alive, has signaled to them that their vote doesn't matter, that ultimately the same people are going to be in power, that they are having dinner with each other every night anyway. And so why should I believe that this person is trying to fight this person when they're spending the holidays together, they're sending beloved messages to one another? Like, at some point, we have to be willing to show a starker difference between the two parties. And if the Democrats are not going to do that, they're going to lose a lot of people, not necessarily to the Republican Party, but just to being a non-voter altogether. And that is one of the worst parts you can have about a democracy, is people who won't even show up to vote.
No, I agree, because again, we're not expecting every single elected official within the Democratic Party to think exactly the same. That is not what we're saying. But we are saying that there should be an opportunity for nuanced conversations, for true debate and true imagination. And then the party can rally, and then the people, the voters can, not people being selected by the hierarchy to represent a specific community, because that's how we got people like John Featherman.
Yeah.
I'm from Pennsylvania. Okay, that's how we got Christian Cinema. And Joe Manchin. Like, that's how we got those individuals who were constantly barriers to Democrats passing really would have been historical legislation to protect Americans.
Yeah.
Those folks stood in the way of true progress and are standing in the way of true progress. And John Featherman, I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania, and
he's so disappointing. So disappointing.
He ran as a rebel, as a progressive, like, sir, please.
Yep. 1,000,000%. It's really sad. It's really sad. I mean, we're still seeing power being built in different ways, but it's sad to see that those who have the most power and the largest platforms, the biggest microphones, aren't doing much about it. We are coming off of incredible movements like the Amazon Labor Union, like the rise of tenant organizing, like the mutual aid networks that popped up during the COVID-19 pandemic and that were providing direct resources when the government failed. The Democratic Party should have capitalized on that grassroots mobilization, on those local organizations who are building out networks and saying, how can we empower you? And unfortunately, what we had instead was the Democratic Party deciding which races mattered more to them, underinvesting in races that mattered a lot to people and ultimately would have mattered a lot to building up this electorate. And so it just all goes to make people feel like they're going to do what they want to do anyway. Like I feel like a pawn, and we don't want people feeling like pawns in a democracy, certainly not in the party that's supposed to be representing the most marginalized.
Yeah. And the idea and the mentality of vote blue no matter who, I think prevents us from making substantial investments on the local level. And I'm not just talking about local elections. I'm talking about interns for the Democrats. I'm talking about volunteers. I'm talking about training folks. The reason why the opposition has been winning and winning well for the last few years is because they have been investing heavily in paid opportunities for staff. The current secretary, press secretary, she rolls up the ranks as an intern, right? And so vote blue matter who doesn't enable for us to make true investments, because vote blue matter who assumes that you're going to vote blue regardless of who the candidate is. And we need bright minds with bright ideas and transformative futures that it will enable for all of us to believe in a world that is different than the one we currently exist in. On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with our lovely guest, Chelsea Miller, to talk further about this phenomenon and how we as a party can move forward. Again, you're watching On the Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
We are back on the other side of change, only on the Black Star Network, digging into voting blue no matter who and why that is not a real strategy. I'm so excited to bring up our next guest. Chelsea Miller is a sister friend to both Jamira and I. We learned so much from her. She's a co-founder of Freedom March New York, so a real boots on the ground organizer, also founder of CPM Global and an incredible social impact strategist. Welcome to the other side of change, Chelsea.
Hi, I'm so excited to be with y'all today. I feel like there's a lot for us to get into.
Oh, so much for us to get into. So much for us to get into.
I mean, we couldn't talk about imagination without having, a prominent Gen Zer on the line telling us how they are envisioning the world in an entirely different way, which I love. I mean, I think people rag on Gen Z all the time, and I'm like, why? They're saying the things, doing the things that none of us are brave enough to do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stems from fear, but we know that you just have to push through that and keep applying the pressure. And a lot of the things that we say end up coming to fruition, and that's why we are in the situation we're in now. So,
okay, no Thomas. Okay, we support that. So as you have noticed, both leading up to and in the aftermath of the election so far, how had Democrats. Okay, let's start that over. Chelsea, what have you noticed both leading up to and in the aftermath of the election so far as how Democrats have responded to Republicans consolidating power?
I think that what we are seeing is the trend that we've been seeing for the past few years, right? And it's the desire to try to stay in the middle, even when the middle no longer serves us. And what we have seen is that there is a deep, deep desire across the country for people to understand who our leaders are, what they believe in, and whether or not they actually stand with them. Now, the problem is that the Republican Party, between the tales that they have crafted for themselves and some of the truths that they've doubled down on, and the fears of American society that they have used to their advantage, have built and mobilized a base. And let's be even more specific. We're talking about MAGA. We're talking about Donald Trump, because we know that the Republican Party, as it stood years ago, the revitalization that took place was because of the Trump election and the Trump movement, right? We remember the time when Republicans didn't even want to give Donald Trump the nomination. But because of the resurgence of a movement, that is what catapulted the Republican Party. The problem is that the Democratic Party is afraid of their movements. In fact, the Democratic Party has begun to believe the things and the lies that have been told about them, and they have now started to believe those lies themselves. And as a result of that, it has stagnated the party. It has stagnated our base, and it has led to what you all were talking about earlier, right? This sense of essentially just the disillusionment for so many Democratic voters who were like, we were ready to show up and do the work. We were ready to get behind the Democratic Party. We were looking for our movements. And every single time we try to bring the energy of a movement, y'all said, simmer down. We're going to try to stay in the middle. And so now look what the middle got us. This is where we are.
Yeah. Whoo, wow. You just
said he's ashy. That's what it got us.
No, but for real. And you just said such an important word, especially I want to pull out what you said as far as the Democratic Party is afraid of their movements, the movements on the left. And what's interesting is they're looking over at the Republican Party like the grass is greener. And instead of saying, oh, they are empowering and emboldening their grassroots movement, let's do the same with our movement. The Democratic Party moderates are just trying to latch on to the Republicans movement instead of owning up to who we are. It's like this fear of organizing, and it's so odd that it's happening in this way. So I'm really curious, and also just like they're just pulling a lot of Republican playbooks, like being single-minded, supporting the party even when they disagree ideologically. What's the danger in Democrats trying to play a Republican's game, and what would be more strategic?
I would say that the Democratic Party needs to remember who they are. And I think that we are looking at the Republican Party and saying, as of right now, right, today, right, the Democrats are spending so much time focusing on what the Republicans are doing. But the reality is that the Republicans took the Democratic playbook. They took the playbook of how to move and organize. They took the playbook of how to latch on to the hopes and dreams of a population that is marginalized and feels decentered from the narrative. And so they took everything that was the Democratic playbook and they flipped it to say, actually, no, it is the average white man who is the most in danger in our current society. Right? It is the average white man who DEI is in fact oppressing. Right? And so now it's kind of like the flip and the reverse of now they are trying to recategorize who was oppressed in America. Right. And so it's interesting because I think now what we are seeing is this push of, we are afraid of liberals and the left becoming the majority. And so we need to make sure that we have, the population to maintain control and all these things. And so all of that to say that I think that realistically speaking, the Democratic Party needs to remember who they are and who they are responsible to. And I also think that there's something to be said about realizing that playbooks are meant to be drafted, ran, and when it does not work, you rewrite it. You don't do the same thing over and over again. And you don't sit and wait for your opposition to figure out what your game plan is and then have them run with it. That's when you bring in a new coach. That's when you start leading differently. That's when you bring in new players. And so I think for us going into the next 4 years and beyond, the question is whether or not we are going to stop relying on the way that things used to be. We're going to stop relying on traditional pathways through institutions, because that is not the only way that we can create change and effectively lead. That also requires us to show up and be in community. That requires us to listen and stop fearing young people on the front lines. Stop fearing Black women showing up and leading and saying how we're supposed to do it and why and the tone of our voices, but really think about the way that you want to propel a vision. And I think that the moment that we stop hyper-focusing on MAGA and Trump and Project 2025 and all of these things, because all of that is doing is allowing us to be reactive, when now is the time for us to start building out a plan.
Yeah, it's so I'm so happy you flagged that in regards to the idea that plans are meant to be changed, right? If the times change, we have to have a plan to meet the moment. And the idea that you have Republicans and their opposition planning for Project 2025 for years, and there is no equivalent plan on the Democratic side, it just goes to show you the lack of preparation. But also, as someone like you, Chelsea, who have really organized folks in community, but also in the C-suite, what do you think the discrepancy is when the Democratic Party say vote blue no matter who, with the recognition that there are actually young people who are ready to lead if they were given the opportunity and the resources to do so?
I would say that the discrepancy is something that we saw coming, and we knew that it would hurt. And we knew that if not addressed, that this would be where we are. And so being on the front lines and seeing the movement and coming in, Freedom March NYC was birthed in the midst of the George Floyd uprising. And so when we were on the front lines and also in the midst of a global pandemic, we saw already that institutions do not always work. We saw already that the only time that these things are effective is when there is a status quo. But the minute that that status quo is challenged or there is a fracture in it, people are going to go where they feel most safe, and that is always going to be in community. And so if you do not have a direct plan to engage with people in real time, right? When we were on the front lines organizing, nobody cared about where you went to school. Nobody cared about what job you had. People just wanted to make sure that you had their back and that you would help to make sure they got home.
Yeah.
And you believed the same things that they believed, and you saw them as human. We forgot the importance of showing people that we stand with them as a Democratic Party. And when you decide that there's nothing that you will stand for, then you will fall for anything. And what we saw with this past presidential election and what we are seeing now play out all across the country is that the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates and Democratic races all across this country are falling for anything. When you don't have a clear plan, then you're making dinners with the opposition. When you don't have a clear plan, then you are showing up and only half of your members are on the same page of what's going to happen at a presidential address. When you don't have a clear plan, then some folks are getting votes in their districts, and then other places are seeing a red wave. When you don't have a clear plan, then you don't even know how to communicate to your base. How can your base even trust you with the direction that they're supposed to be headed in if even leadership is unclear of what that looks like? When you don't have a clear plan, the only thing that's going to be your talking points is Trump, instead of bringing it back to what the American promise is and what people need right now to feel safe.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better.
And let's call a spade a spade. Let's name the things. And I think that's also one of the biggest frustrations that we've seen with the Democratic Party is the communication crisis. No one is naming it and saying what it is. And we are assuming that somehow people are not intelligent or uninformed, as though we're not living in a digital age where everyone has access to a phone. And so we'd rather blame the technology instead of blaming the conditions. We'd rather say it's an issue with the algorithm instead of saying what is feeding the algorithm. Real-time crisis, real-time mismanagement of promises and trust and policy and foreign affairs. But it's easier for us to say the problem is coming from outside the house. Well, what's happening inside the house? And I said, and I even said this on stage last year before the election at a democracy convention, when everyone on stage was saying, you know, the problem with this generation is the fact that they're anti-democratic and all of these things. And I said, well, the way that we define what it looks like to be democratic, the way that it's traditionally defined may be different from how young people understand that. If you go into communities and you ask young people how many of them participate in mutual aid or bring out mutual aid efforts, you'd be surprised at those numbers. If you ask them how many people are showing up and creating third spaces for community and belonging to begin having these conversations, you're going to see overwhelmingly how many young people are showing up to do that. Now, if the only metric that you're using to see if young people are engaged is based on civic leadership and how many of them show up to a school board meeting, then you are going to be sorely disappointed. And so it's time for us to start meeting folks where they are and understanding the places where they are going to build community. It's also time for us to realize that if we do not reckon with our history and acknowledge what is taking place instead of avoiding it and then start calling it different things, oh, it's the algorithm. No, it's not the algorithm, it's America. So it's time for us to start unpacking and unseating that. And if we are not willing to, then as we know, the chickens are going to come home to roost.
Roost.
They're not laying eggs, but they'll come home to roost.
Woo! Yes, Chelsea. Come on, girl. I just love what you said. And I think it's so important to say. And also, there used to be a time when the Democratic Party did have those different metrics where someone like a John Lewis could be desegregating through civil disobedience, technically breaking the law, and that be valued, and then him become a tenured legacy member of Congress. And now it's like the party is being ran by older white, strategists and consultants who have no idea what the people need. How can the party go back to being a true voice for the people? And are there Democrats who you think are doing this well, who you want to highlight?
I am going to hold my flowers because we still have a long way to go. But this is what, because listen, I'm expecting a lot of that, and we all need a lot. And right now, I don't think it's the time to give roses just because we are in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that the reality is that there is so much more that needs to be done. And Americans are hurting. And a lot of this stems from that, right? From a historical standpoint of racial division that hasn't been healed. Now we have critical race theory. We have books being banned. We have all of these things that are happening across our country that is creating this divisiveness that is not new to this generation. On top of that, we have a party that right now is being fueled by who has the greatest dollars. When, as we know, what wins elections, of course, is going to be money, but it's going to be people. It is going to be people showing up and believing in something. And so I am waiting to see who is going to show the Democratic base, the left, liberals, folks in the middle, people who want to vote but don't know who to vote for, swing voters, who is going to stand for something clearly and the most defined so that we can get the energy and the fuel back to show that we clearly are ready to be in the game. Because as of right now, we're not.
Yeah. Which is truly disappointing. Okay, last question that we have for you, Chelsea, is in the meantime, what is the best work, the best way for people to work within the current systems that will enable for us to strengthen the advocacy that we all need in order to get us to the place that is going to allow all of us to be free?
We love this question because we're putting the power back into the hands of the people. So I would say that the best way to do that is to organize. And I was just on a call this week and I was saying this. Organizing does not solely have to be being on the front lines and marching. If that is your calling, then you go and do that. I'll also speak about marching a little bit. But the greatest thing that you can do is be clear on what your plan is and bring like-minded people together to execute on that. Some of the greatest movements within our country did not happen on social media. It is a tool, but it cannot be the only tool. And so it is important for us to begin building our communities back with relational organizing, knowing who your neighbors are, starting to have those conversations on it, even if it's on a local level, because we know that you can build models for success on a local level. Yeah. Not everything has to be, how can we get the millions to be on the same page? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's the few thousand that are in your community, just like in Freedom Summer. Okay, they weren't out here posting on social media. They didn't have social media in 1964. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was a couple hundred college students that went down to Mississippi to partner with local leaders to organize to get Mississippi Black folks to go and vote and have their rights. True. And because of that, that's what led to the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, all the things that were passed. A few young people who showed up, went to go and live in community with each other, were writing letters home to their parents. And because of that, that completely shifted the landscape of America as we know it. And now we see those things being rolled back on. The second thing that I will say is that it is time for us to ask ourselves, because marching was something that was seen as radical in the 60s. Mm-hmm. There's a reason as to why they marched, because around that time, even within that generation, it was illegal to even be able to congregate. It was illegal to be able to even know how to read and write, to even be able to spell your own name. And so when you saw thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people coming outside and showing up for something, that was radical. We are in 2025 where we have marched before. The blueprint has been set for that. What is our blueprint for 2025 and beyond that is going to be just as transformative, just as disruptive as a march? Not a march, just as disruptive as one. And I think once we start asking ourselves those very serious questions, that is when we will get to a point where in the next 50, 60 years, we can say that we've done our jobs and give ourselves some roses.
Yes. Love it. Well, we thank you so much for participating in this episode. Tell the folks how they can stay in contact with you.
Stay in contact with me at the Chelsea Miller on Instagram, and I'm always up to something, whether that be producing a docuseries or organizing some initiative or being in community. I am outside, so definitely get involved.
No, we are
Miller, the big one, not the little one.
Yeah, and one of the few people that isn't just like yapping for yapping's sake, but actually putting work, her words into work and actually producing real tangible change that is going to impact communities. And she's done that already. So we truly appreciate you being a guest on this show, and we look forward to having you back at a later date. With that being said, this is The Other Side of Change. We're going to take a quick break, and this is the Black Star Network.
What's up, y'all? Look, Fanbase is more than a platform. It's a movement to empower creators, offering a unique opportunity for everyday people to invest in Black-owned tech, infrastructure, and help shape the future of social media. Investing in technology is essential for creating long-term wealth and influence in the digital age. The Black community must not only consume tech, we must own it.
Discover how equity crowdfunding can serve as a powerful tool for funding Black businesses, allowing entrepreneurs to raise capital directly through their community through the Jobs Act.
We are back on the other side of change, only on the Black Star Network. And as always, this conversation is far from over. We all have a lot to do to take back our democracy and really have it in our hands the way that it should be. Those on the Democratic Party and those beyond. If you're an independent or whatever your political affiliation, I don't believe a Republican is listening to us. You have the say, you have a voice, use it, and encourage your political representatives to be just that, representatives.
If you want to dive deeper, check out Our Time Is Now by Stacey Abrams and follow groups like the Working Family Parties, Build to Win, and Just Democrats.
And most importantly, stay engaged, know your rights, organize, and hold your representatives accountable. Until next time, keep pushing for a just future, only on the other side of change.